Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Gross, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Scholarship here at the Linda Hall Library in beautiful Kansas City, Missouri. It is my privilege to welcome you to the official launch of the library's new online exhibition, The Sun in Early Modernity. This exhibit uses rare books from our History of Science collection to describe how Earth's nearest star shaped the development of scientific knowledge and other aspects of early modern life. It's a project that's the brainchild of Sophie Battell, a senior lecturer in English literature at the University of Zurich and a member of the Linda Hall Library's 2023-2024 fellowship cohort. Last summer, Sophie approached me and my colleagues with an exciting proposal to recruit and supervise a team of graduate students who would curate an exhibition using the Linda Hall Library's digital collections. Today, Sophie and her students are joining us from Switzerland to discuss their experiences turning that idea into a reality. Our discussion will be moderated by two scholars who are deeply familiar with the history of early modern astronomy. Nydia Pineda de Avila is an assistant professor in the Department of History at the University of California, San Diego, and a 2023-2024 Linda Hall Library Fellow. She works at the intersection of the history of science, art history, and the history of the book, focusing on the technical, political, and rhetorical functions of astronomical images and instruments. Her forthcoming monograph, Paper Moons, The Poetics of Selenographies in the 17th Century, will offer the first cultural history of lunar maps in the aftermath of the dissemination of the telescope and the Galilean controversies about the appearance and nature of the moon. Thomás Haddad is an associate professor of history of science at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and a 2021-2022 Linda Hall Library Fellow. His research examines the cultural and political history of stargazing in the 17th and 18th centuries across the Atlantic and Portuguese colonial worlds. He is also interested in moon maps and map makers, and his monograph, Maps of the Moon, Lunar Cartography from the 17th Century to the Space Age, was published by Brill in 2019. Now, it's also worth noting that Nydia and Thomás have experience designing online exhibitions. In 2020, they served as the co-curators of Constellations, Reimagining Celestial Histories in the Early Americas, which used books, maps, and prints from the John Carter Brown Library in Providence, Rhode Island, to explore the various ways that people in the Western Hemisphere engaged with the heavens between the 16th and the 19th centuries. Their academic backgrounds, curatorial expertise, and the time that each of them has spent navigating the Linda Hall Library's digital collections during their own virtual fellowships make Thomás and Nydia uniquely qualified to lead today's discussion, and we're incredibly grateful that they agreed to participate in this roundtable. Now, if you would like to join the conversation, please feel free to paste your comments or questions in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. But for now, please join me in welcoming our moderators who will introduce the rest of today's panelists. Thomás, Nydia, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that generous introduction. Thank you, everybody, for inviting us to be part of this wonderful event. We're really honored.
Yeah, it's such an honor, such a pleasure. I'm really excited about being here and about this great exhibition that many of you have probably already visited virtually. If you didn't, do it now, do it after this session. It's great.
So we're going to begin by introducing the curators of this exhibition. It's a real privilege to be part of this project, which is also not just a curatorship project, a normal curatorship project, but also a pedagogy project in which the library is participating. Thank you. Thanks to Sophie Battell. And as Ben has already mentioned, Sophie is senior lecturer in English literature at the University of Zurich. And she was a remote fellow this year with me at the Linda Hall Library. And this is where we started talking about this project. Sophie led this curatorial team, which we are now going to introduce. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Alessia Tami. She is an English and Publishing graduate student from Bath Spa University in the UK. She is currently in the final year of a Literary Studies MA at the University of Zurich. She is passionate about blue humanities, eco-criticism, and animal studies, And at present, her research focuses on the role of water and water rights in Australian Indigenous storytelling.
And now it is my pleasure to welcome Olivia Lanni, who is pursuing a master's degree in English and German literature and linguistics at the University of Zurich. Olivia's main field of interest is early modern theater, especially in connection to psychoanalysis and the medical humanities. Olivia also teaches German at a Swiss private school and works at the university as a tutor for textual analysis. And also a great pleasure and honor to welcome Wilmari Claasen, the other curator. She holds a bachelor's degree in English literature and linguistics, and she's currently pursuing a master's degree in literary studies at the University of Zurich. Her field of interest is mostly focused on early modern drama, and she has been working at the Self-Access Center of the University of Zurich and the ETH since 2021. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for letting us be here with you discussing this wonderful exhibition. And I would like to immediately start making a couple of questions to Sophie Battell, the project leader, current fellow of the Linda Hall Library. Just before moving to the questions, Sophie, it's such a beautiful project. For me, it has everything to do with the same generosity we as fellows of the Linda Hall Library experience. You are also extending this to these three amazing students, Olivia, Wilmari, Alessia, and they are also extending their generosity to all of us, sharing their work. This is really beautiful, and thank you so much. But Sophie, without further ado, Nydia and I discussed a lot of things we wanted to ask you to ask Olivia, Alessia, and Wilmari. But the first question is the sun. Why the sun? You, as a Shakespeare scholar, as an early modern literature scholar, what drew you to the sun? And then, if you can segue into telling people, the audience, how you think they can engage with the materials, with this dense, rich exhibition. It would be great to hear you on those two questions.
Thank you so much, Thomás and Nydia. We're absolutely delighted that you're moderating this discussion with us. It's a real privilege to be in conversation with you. And all of us here in Zurich are so grateful to the Linda Hall Library for facilitating this fellowship and this internship. The sun, why the sun? I think the sun is a really mysterious object. And even today, there's still such a lot about the sun that eludes our grasp. There's a lot that we don't know, that astrophysicists don't know about the sun. So it's a really evocative, enigmatic object. And we find this as well as it appears in the literature of the 17th century. The other thing that I personally like about the sun as an area of study is that it provokes very varied responses. And I think we saw this quite recently with the total solar eclipse over North America, Mexico, Canada. It was a really interesting sort of astronomical event to observe. Here in Europe, we didn't see it, obviously, but we were following the response, and I think there was, on the one hand, a desire to engage with what was happening at a very scientific level, to think about the astronomical discoveries that could be made throughout this very rare solar event. But also people seemed to really engage with the eclipse as, in a way that was very emotional, very embodied. I think some people had a quasi-mystical or religious experience, from what I read in the papers, in any case. Perhaps you and Nydia did as well. So I think it's a kind of interesting, mysterious object. Something that is a real privilege as a scholar of literature is that our work is very interested in doubt and ambiguity. So we feel less concerned with coming to concrete conclusions. And I think this is something else that fascinates me about the topic. So when an audience encounters our exhibition, I hope that they will be surprised at the magnitude of the sun's influence on the everyday life of men and women in the 17th century. I think there's a sense perhaps that we feel that we know what the sun is in this period. There are such canonical writers, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, these huge figures in the history of astronomy. But something that Alessia, Olivia, Wilmari and I have really tried to do in this exhibition is to uncover different stories about our human relationship with the sun. So we've tried to move beyond astronomy to bring in architecture, chronometry, timekeeping, navigation, and we tried to show how the sun had a real impact in everyday life. So we hope that people will be surprised when they read some of the lesser known examples of early modern sun cultures. We also hope that you will enjoy some of the human stories presented here. We are all literary scholars and we're very interested in narrative and this human element. So this is something I think all the wonderful MA students have tried to do in their chapters. They've tried to bring out what these astronomical discoveries mean in practice in everyday life. So for example, Wilmari's chapter on nautical calculations, she mentions that this is nothing if you have choppy waves and the motion of the ship, the best mathematical calculations can go haywire. Or Alessia and Olivia, they mention the need for science funding and patronage networks, whether we're reporting on comets or watching disputes play out in the astronomical literature. So these really sort of relatable moments. I mean, one more thing I might just mention is it's also been important to all of us, I think, to uncover global stories about the sun in this period. So moving beyond Western science to bring in, for example, sunspot observations in China and Japan, the rich ways in which Mesoamerican culture engages with the sun. So we really hope that everyone who visits our site enjoys the exhibition. What the Linda Hall Library design team have achieved is extraordinary. They've created a really interactive and engaging display, and we hope that people will navigate the exhibition site at their own pace and enjoy uncovering these new stories of the sun in early modernity.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. And now we would like to take the viewers to the exhibit itself. So the image that opens up the exhibition is telling in many ways. It is probably one of the best known scenes of early modern sunspot observations through optical instruments and methods. The engraving was published by Christoph Scheiner in his Rosa Ursina in 1630, and the Linda Hall Library has a beautiful copy of this magnificent volume. So this is a scene that can be directly associated with questions relative to early modern planetary observation, to experiments with optics, to contested ideas about the nature and movement of the sun, which was, as this exhibition is telling us, the luminary that presided over early modern astronomical controversies and early modernity. Now, the pictorial composition represented here also tells us about the spaces, the people, and the conditions of optical experiments. So here we can see division of labor. We can see calibration of instruments. We can see observers communicating while they work. They're doing different things. They're probably agreeing on what is going next and, talking about the process as it happens. These observers are wearing religious attire. They are Jesuits. And the building from which they are studying sunspots is very likely an ecclesiastical space. So we are invited to virtually walk into this exhibition with an image that straightforwardly puts us in an early modern space where science, technology, and religion are part and parcel. And they're part and parcel in the understanding and representation and embodied experience of the sun. But I would like to say that this opening picture and the exhibition itself does much more. It places the sun at the center as both a distant celestial body that acts upon human life and as an object, as an image that is recreated and materialized on paper, in manuscripts, in books, by the human hand. Things happen around the sun. People organize their lives, their knowledge, rituals, and beliefs. People make things with and for the sun. They make instruments for navigation, city horoscopes, sites of devotion, emblematic mottos. So the exhibit explores the meaning of the sun as an object of science, but it also reminds us that the sun was a source of light and warmth for other human activities, a continuous pattern in the sky that accompanied the rhythm of life institutionally and intimately. And knowing the sun, we are reminded, was also about creating environmental harmony, religion, politics, and poetry. And this is why it is so relevant to the present as well. Thomás, I think you're going to take us to some highlights of the exhibition now.
Yeah, after this wonderful set of opening remarks, I just wanted to highlight a couple of objects because, of course, all of us are eager to start making questions to the curatorial team. But I think it would be impossible not to direct the audience's attention to, well, the very first object in the exhibition, which
Thomás,
is here.
if I may, you're showing your screen, your whole screen, but we are seeing more than the exhibit itself.
I am sorry. This is really awkward. Just 1 minute. Yeah, I think now things are gonna be better. Aren't they? Yeah, thank you. Good. Okay, so this is one of the treasures of the Linda Hall Library, and it's evidently impossible. I think I can put it in this way, to talk about the sun in early modernity without talking about Copernicus's achievement or about his book. This is the second edition of Copernicus, De Revolutionibus Orbium Caelestium, and it's one of the most striking objects that belong to the Linda Hall Library's collections. It's obviously a very technical book, and the way it is framed here in the exhibition is not related to its technical content, because it's not about this that we are talking about here in this exhibition. It's about the sun. And one of the most consequential ways of early modern people, early modern, in this case, Europeans, engaging with the sun is materialized in this book by Copernicus. There is a huge amount of literature, specialized literature, in the history of science, in the history of ideas, in cultural history, in every imaginable corner or province of scholarship that has been produced about this book. And I think it's only fitting and also very brave that the exhibition starts with this object. It's really, I think, a fantastic choice by the team to really face from the start the book that, for some people, put the sun at the center of the universe. Of course, this is a very problematic statement, which I'm making here, but I think it serves to perhaps seed a few questions in our minds that we can go back to them later. Now, I want to highlight, you can see here the exhibition, it has 6 main sections, main chapters. This is the first one about Copernicus, the so-called Copernican revolution. It features in the main place Copernicus's book. It's not going to be possible to highlight things, objects from every section. I selected with Nydia just another one here. This is a beautiful chapter about eclipses, comets, and omens, older ways of reading the skies. All of these phenomena are related to the sun, eclipses in the most obvious way, but also comets. And I think it was a fantastic choice, this heavily annotated copy of one of the most influential, I could say, textbooks in astronomy that's ever been produced, published. This is one copy of Johannes de Sacrobosco's De Sfera, or his book on the sphere, the celestial sphere, the movements of the celestial sphere. And this is another treasure of the Linda Hall Library's collections. This is one of those things every scholar wants to find, one copy with this amount of annotations, this amount of engagement from a reader who's been dead for probably 500 years or something like this, or a little bit less. And it's a window into the past, into the ways in which people made sense of astronomical material in this case, that is really fascinating and very touching and moving, I could say. You, from the audience, you can have the same delight that Nydia and I had when we delved into the exhibition, and you can find gems just like this one, hidden, well, not so hidden, but inside any one of those 6 fantastic chapters that were developed by Alessia, Olivia, Wilmari, and Sophie. So those are just 2 highlights. But let's move on to the discussion. Nydia, you have a first general question for the team.
That's right. So one of the most incredible aspects of Linda Hall Library Fellows experience is the amount of digitized materials that one can access, and that one can, the books that one can request to be digitized. And so Thomás and I and Sophie, as long-term fellows, we had the experience of working with digital collections. And it's very rare that at an MA level, students get to engage with library materials at this so closely, and to work remotely in the creation of an exhibit. It's a very special project. So we would like to ask Olivia, Alessia, and Tami about the experience of navigating the catalog, about the possibilities of discovery that the catalog might offer, those moments of serendipity, and and yes, of the curatorial process, generally speaking, with remote materials, because sometimes we think that being physically in the library is absolutely crucial, and you have shown us that it's not the only way of doing research.
I can maybe start us off. I would like to highlight a very positive aspect of the digital catalog, and that was the ability to use keyword search to find aspects of the text. This is something that I'm used to doing in my studies already, so it wasn't new, but it did help me very much in this exhibition because this sheer wealth of material we had to comb through required some strategies to speed up the process, and keyword search really helped me to find some interesting information that I otherwise might have missed, because sometimes the chapter title or the text title doesn't necessarily tell you that much about what's in it, but if I can keyword search sun or eclipse or comet, it might show up in places I didn't expect, and make sure that hidden gems don't go overlooked. It also helped me to find explanations for things I struggled with. For example, I was struggling to find a text that properly explained how latitude was calculated at the time. And by putting in the keyword search latitude, I found a very thorough explanation in a secondary text on Captain Cook's voyages, which I wasn't expecting at all. So it's these little moments of unexpected discoveries that the keyword search especially allows us to do. And that, I would say, was my favorite part of this.
I'm just gonna pick up on that, and I think the library team did an amazing job at digitizing everything. I mean, I had some books that I think had like 400 pages, and I didn't have to feel bad at all. They were available at all times, like the digitized copies. I guess that also gave them an international quality in a sense of, I'm in Switzerland, they're in the US, we're doing this overseas, it works fine as a PDF. I can take it out on the train while I'm commuting. So that quality to digitized copies was amazing to have and extremely convenient. And then kind of picking up on what Wilmari said about like combining it with a keyword search, I tried to decipher the handwriting. I wasn't able to, but there are tools online that can do that for you. And also being able to just really zoom into pages the way our eyes couldn't. I think being able to have those digital tools and combining them with each other can really create really like interesting insights. And also all the highlighting, I was able to destroy the copies with highlighters, so that's also great.
I completely agree with Wilmari and Olivia, and in my case I particularly enjoyed the moments when you forgot that you were looking at the digital text because it was actually the physicality of the book, the details about its pages that told you a story. And often it happened that perhaps you had read something in a secondary source that told you about the history of the book, and then when you went to the catalogue, you found the book in the Linda Hall Library archive, you were able to see what that information meant in the book itself. For example, for the first edition of Galileo Sidereo's Nuncius, on the chapter title page, there is evidence of the process that Galileo underwent to secure his patronage. And to do so, there was at some point a change in the book's title and in the name that the stars were given from Medicia Sidera, from Cosmica Sidera to Medicia Sidera. And Medici was the surname of Galileo's patron, but by the time the patron had said, "I'd rather have my surname," the pages had already been printed bearing his first name, Cosimo. So Galileo and his team had to hurriedly paste a piece of paper over this word in order not to anger their patron or just to make it look as if they had waited for his decision. And I found that moment very, very touching to see, okay, this is the first edition, you can see it, and something that you've read about outside of the library is then, you know, you meet it during the research process.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Well, I want to already make a question. It's going to be to Wilmari. I know you've been involved, especially involved precisely in the section of the exhibition that contains that edition of Sacro Bosco that I highlighted a few minutes ago. And well, fully annotated, some reader used that. Their marks are physically in the book. But then, well, in several moments when we are working with this kind of materials, we have other possible glimpses into the lives of people who were writing or reading those books, those materials. So I would love to know if you found things like this in your research.
I must say one of my favorite instances of this is the author John Bainbridge, if I remember correctly, John Bainbridge. He wrote a book on an astronomical treatise on comets, and it is full of astronomical descriptions of comets as well as prognostications of the future. And I just loved reading the end of it because you can see his voice come through so strongly in the text. He comments that he hopes that this comet, this messenger from heaven, will, in addition to all of the future events he interpreted it as foretelling, would also foretell I think, let me find the exact wording here, some munificent and liberal patron to these ravishing but impoverishing studies, being the study of astrology, which I just find really interesting because, of course, that is also his study. So he's kind of indirectly asking, please sponsor me, which is very relatable to this day. Another favorite of mine that actually didn't make it into the exhibition because it wasn't quite my section of focus was a footnote in a text that I read that mentioned that a certain mathematician called, I will not pronounce this correctly, but Carlos de Siguiencia y Góngora, sorry about that, that he describes how the populace were terrified by a solar eclipse and running, and it was pandemonium. And meanwhile, he is happily sitting there with his telescope observing and making this difference between himself, this elevated scholar, and the populace that just don't understand the science, and they're so scared of these, they're so superstitious. And I found that quite amusing to see the voice of these authors and the very human opinions come through in their scientific texts.
Nydia, you're muted. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I was saying it's really fascinating to hear all three of you speak about your moments of discovery. It's I agree that research with digital sources can be incredibly gratifying, and it's just something that we need to think about more in the humanities, and how to do digital humanities in meaningful ways. And I think this is an incredible example of a very successful project. Now, I'd like to ask more about the different aspects, different parts of the structure of the exhibit. And so I'm going to ask a question to Olivia. Olivia, you developed a section on chronology and timekeeping, and this is an aspect of the history of astronomy that is really not very well known. The history of astronomy has turned to focus more on issues of cosmology, theory, hypothesis, experimentation, and obviously biographical approaches. But timekeeping, chronology, the science that described the history of timekeeping and timekeeping methods, was actually perhaps much more relevant in the world of astronomy in early modernity, in terms of how widespread it was. And so you developed a section that is fantastic, that focuses on different techniques, instruments, specifically on dialing. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that. So is it possible to trace in your research, did you find changes in the importance ascribed to timekeeping in the materials that you worked with?
So thank you for this question. It's a really interesting one, but just to preface this, it's also a very loaded question. Before I start, for anybody who's interested in sundials and timekeeping, all the sources by Green are amazing on this. He's done amazing research. But what he's also found is that we can't really know how they kept time. And from that, we can, I guess, draw conclusions, what they asked of time, or what did they ask of the tools that could measure time. And I found that there's two different approaches to timekeeping. So the earliest clocks, I would say, those were water clocks, but also hourglasses and candles. And what they could do was they could measure intervals, how much time had elapsed, sort of similar to our modern like stopwatches. So these were like universal. It didn't matter where on the globe you were standing. And from the research that we have, or the findings that we have, we know that they were used already like by the ancient Egyptians and ancient Greeks, also some parts in China. So that is one approach to timekeeping, or how they could keep time maybe. But in terms of the natural movements, so how the sun moved, how the moon moved, they needed something different. And maybe the simplest form of it was the sundial. So the dial is a circle, has numbers on it, and the sundial with this the stick in the middle, if you will, it would cast a shadow. So this idea of using the sun, or using what you had at your disposal to, at very early stages, divide the day into morning and afternoon, like when does the shadow cross over the middle, that already existed. And then from there it started to get more complex. That's where we start to see then the scientific dials develop, where they could respond to the moon, they could respond to the sun in different ways. Like there's an image of like a ring dial. So from what I've seen, they could wear the ring and then take it off, and then on the go measure time, or see what time of day it is. But when we're talking about the common folk, people who didn't have access to this type of education, it seems like they could only do what the sun gave them, in a sense of, if it was rainy, if it was cloudy, then you just had to make the best of your schedule, or the best of your day, and kind of work around it. And if you then go to the section on the sundial mottos, when you start to read them, it seems like time also had, or the day itself kind of had this meaning of, it comes and goes, so you have to seize the day, carpe diem, and you just have to make the best of it and somehow schedule your day, maybe also through communication, through a rhythm. Green made a very interesting argument about maybe these people just had a rhythm or an inner schedule that we don't have anymore today. But in terms of timekeeping, it's definitely dependent on the level of education you had access to, and scheduling and such had, I would say, also a very social character to it. I think in a way that we can't understand anymore today, but it's definitely worth thinking about with what we have.
Yeah, Nydia, you're muted again.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was incredibly rich and erudite. I hope everybody listening in the audience has taken notes. I certainly did. I would like to continue this conversation about the social aspects of astronomical knowledge. Asking Alessia about the section on architecture. So Alessia, it's the materials that you selected are displayed in a very interesting manner. I think, first of all, you gave us an image that comes from the voyages of Antonio de Ulloa, late 18th century. And Well, you can tell us about the chronological arrangement of the sources and how you decided how to present different projects in which the sun was key in the architectural conception of different types of urban ritual-related constructions. I've been thinking that it's important to think about these books that you selected in the context of their publication. So they were made for a particular audience. They carried knowledge from afar, from afar in history and in space as well. And they were taken to European readers. And it would be very interesting to know about both how you conceived the section and also how you think readers of the 17th and 18th century would have read those sources that you are presenting.
Thank you, Nydia, for this really exciting question. And maybe to answer it, I will try and share my screen and show the images, because without the visual support, it might be hard to understand what I'm talking about. I hope this goes smoothly. Okay. Let's try this. And then I'll go here. Can you all see my screen and the section on architecture? All right, so maybe I'll start by answering your last question, Nydia, if that is all right. So I think you mentioned that the context and the purposes behind writing books at the time, books that were meant for Europe, why was that relevant? And I think this page that you can see here is really perhaps one of the best examples to talk about this. So this page is from the Royal Commentaries of Peru, written by Garcilaso de la Vega. And de la Vega was born 8 years after the conquest of Peru began, and he was the son of an Inca noblewoman and a Spanish conqueror. So he was he was in a way also a product of that encounter of cultures. But what is important is that in order to write this book, Garcilaso de la Vega had to embrace imperial ideologies of providentialism and endorse the fact that the Spanish conquest of Peru was something that was useful and very fortunate for the people, the indigenous people of the land, because otherwise his book wouldn't have been printed. So in the commentaries, sorry, I'll start again. So what you can see on this page is a description of a garden within the sun temple of Curicancha, which was a temple dedicated to the sun god in the Cusco, the capital of the Inca Empire that was then occupied by the Spanish forces. And in the description of the garden, De la Vega mentions that there was this miniature garden plated in gold. And you sort of gather that this golden garden was a tribute to how important the sun was for agriculture, for the people of the Inca people, and in general in Mesoamerica as well. But the fact that we can read of this garden in a written form is because the Inca were conquered, and Garcilaso de la Vega was educated in Spain. He moved to Spain when he was 21. So his voice is really coming from the point of view of the conquerors, and the narrative of the book is one of progress. He puts it as a progress towards the Incas embracing Christianity, even though it was a forceful imposition. So I think when you look at this page, it's important to think about the many layers that are behind it, and the fact that you have a golden garden. So it's using a resource that the Spanish came looking for as well and exploited, but in the original building, it was meant as a tribute for how important the sun was for Inca culture. So I think it's quite a good signifier of the different ways that there are of looking at this garden. And I think that answers more or less your first question. And then for the chronology of the sources, I really tried to give substantiality to a topic that is very general. So the importance of the sun in Mesoamerica and in architecture, and our effort, we really try to show that that the sun was important on a global scale. So later we have the sun in Roman times, and that had an impact as well in early modern Europe. They inspired themselves on Roman times. For example, we included a section, Nere's Domus Aurea, which really was built so that the sun on a solstice could illuminate the entrance where Nero would ideally have stood. And you have the same structure in the Pantheon in Rome. So we try to show a few links between astronomy and astrology as well, and architecture. For example, this is an astrological chart analyzing the date of the foundation of Rome. And if you are in the Pantheon, on the day that Rome was founded, the sunlight is supposed to shine through the entrance. So that's how the two things are connected. But we started with Mesoamerica to really show how the sun is also imbricated in colonialism and imperialism. And I think Wilmari also touched on that topic in her own section. And how, when you look at the sun, there's always a complex history behind it.
Thank you so much. So this has been magnificent. It's been really great to hear all three of you talk about the many different aspects of this exhibition that goes from the very detailed, technical and scientific to a more social and even global consideration about the meaning of the sun in early modernity. Now we'd like to open the floor to questions.
Yeah, there is a Q&A chat box, probably in the lower part of your Zoom window. I'm saying this to everybody who is in the audience. We cannot see you, but there are almost 40 people here with us. And while you formulate your questions, just let me follow up with something for Wilmari. It's about, well, perhaps one of the most important ways in which the sun was entangled with colonial projects, navigating by the sun. This is something that, well, many people say the development of astronomical navigation was absolutely necessary for Europeans, particularly Portuguese and Spanish, to cross the Atlantic, to reach India and South Asia from the Indian Ocean. And at the same time, the sun seems absolutely essential for long distance navigation. But, oh God, it's so difficult to understand those things. There is a session you, Wilmari, a section you worked on. And, well, it starts with an astrolabe. It's so complicated. And there are tables and a lot of things. So do you have examples of any kind of tension between theory and putting it into use? Can you share it with us? I'm gonna send through the chat the link for this specific section on navigating by the sun.
Yes, thank you, Thomás. Just to start off, I can honestly say I personally have to count myself among the people struggling to figure out navigation by the sun. My background is very much not in astronomy and geography. So this section was particularly difficult for me to write, which was I found a little bit of connection to the people struggling to figure out how to navigate by the sun in the first place as well. There are incredible tensions between this need and this drive to figure out how to navigate over long distances, especially by sea, with the help of the sun and other fixed stars, and the difficulties in doing so. There are many, many practical problems with this, and the texts that I've read for this section were just full of different scientists and astronomers essentially telling each other that they're wrong. One of my favorites of these is Certain Errors in Navigation by Edward Wright. And it's an absolute goldmine for these types of errors that he points out that especially other people are making. For example, the difficulties with, he calls it eccentricity of the eye, just the unreliability of the human eye that is needed to work with many of these instruments. And also that many of the charts that were published at the time were not correct. And there's one that he says that I find quite funny. He says, "No marvel, therefore, if the mariners complain, as I have heard them sometimes, that they cannot make their observations at the latitude by the sun and the star being the polar star to agree." So charts would not line up and would be difficult to make a line, throwing people off by 10 minutes, which can be a big problem. He also mentions that the tools that are required for navigation require a lot of practice to use, and that they're difficult to use and understand and interpret the results without a mathematical background, which realistically most sailors did not have. So there was this tension between the scholars finding more ways of navigating by the sun and taking the measurements needed for this, and the practicalities of doing this at sea when there is movement, and inexperienced people or people who are experienced with sailing, but they just don't have that theoretical knowledge that is needed to use these new tools that are being developed to actually better navigate. So there's this sense of science making progress, but the practical aspect just not being able to keep up for quite a while. So yes, I found that very interesting, and I felt better knowing that I'm not the only one struggling with latitude and longitude and astrolabes.
Thank you, Wilmari. Yes, in early modernity, I think everybody was struggling with the same. So yeah, that's a great reflection. Thanks so much. We have a question from the audience, and I think this can help us wrap up, actually. I'm going to read it. So not as much a question as an invitation to reflect. Since many of the exhibition designers have strong literature backgrounds, I'm curious if you have favorite moments of discovering literary figures reflecting on mathematical and/or astronomical topics. And does the familiarity with these topics seem to change over the period you are looking at, or remain very close?
Yeah, and I think we could also already include another question. This one is not in the Q&A chat box, but in the chat by Kimberly Carter, about which parts were more fun or harder to put together.
So maybe it would be nice to hear from
I was gonna say from all of you, you know? Yeah. And Sophie, if you could join us again. It's been half an hour since we've last heard you.
I'm very happy to pick up on Carl's lovely question. I think that for me, a moment that stands out in the literature of this period comes in 1611, when the poet John Donne writes that the sun is lost. And I think this is a really interesting line from Donne's poetry. I think it says something fundamental about how, at the same time that the very lines and coordinates connecting the solar system are being remapped and redrawn, and sort of the effect this has on Earth, on the terrestrial plane, and maybe again comes back to my earlier point around literature's relationship with doubt and ambiguity. So it's not really an answer to this question, but I think I like this image of the sun as being somehow lost, even as it's becoming more prominent, a more prominent sky object at the same time.
Olivia.
So in terms of literary figures, this was more or less a coincidence, but at the same, while we were preparing this internship and the exhibition, I was reading King Lear by Shakespeare for my MA, and there is a rather long passage in there where one of the servants was commenting on Lear's mental state. So in the play, he goes more or less completely mad by the end of it. And this servant or this character was saying, oh, maybe it's the stars and the moons and the zodiacs that are causing this madness in Lear. And from then further research that I did, it is so that the four humors, so this medical system, or you had four humors, and depending on how they were, like they had to be in balance for the body to be healthy. And the zodiacs and just how the Earth, I guess, moves and the cosmos, it becomes extremely complex rather quickly, but there seems to be a very strong connection between astronomy or knowledge about astronomy, but then also like medicine and health, obviously also influenced by a lot of superstition at the time. But that was very interesting to see sort of, oh, it's in Shakespeare, and here I have it in a document from an archive.
Alessia?
Yeah, actually, this question takes me back to the day that Sophie pitched this internship to us. We were just reading Edward II in a seminar, and at the beginning of the play by Christopher Marlowe, one of the main characters says, what need do the Arctic people have of starlight when the sun shines for the whole day? The quote is much more elegant, but I don't recall it by heart. I know Sophie specializes in this, so it's very special for her as well. But now, after this exhibition, looking back at that quote, I think I have a far better insight of what that quote means in terms of the knowledge that was already in circulation at the time that Marlowe wrote that verse. So he had grasp of the fact that at the poles, the sun, there will be sunlight for much longer than, say, further down at a different latitude. Yeah, so that will be my contribution.
And Wilmari?
Off the top of my head, the quote that jumps into mind, super famous, is "Our soft would light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." Of course, very famous. And just in the context of all of this, with the sun being, with all this knowledge we now have, with the sun being so central in navigation and orienting yourself, this image of Juliet as the sun, not only as someone or something that gives life and illuminates, but also this orientation aspect of it's the east and Juliet is the sun as a guiding light to orient himself by. So this bit of a navigational astronomical aspect that comes into this love poetry in Romeo and Juliet. So I heard that was really nice.
That's fantastic. We have a few more minutes if people on the audience would like to send in another question, please. We have here. Bravo to all, really interesting. That's great that the audience is loving your exhibition as Nydia and I did.
But we've also reached the hour.
Yeah, in fact, it really was fast, no? For me, this was fantastic. And the most important, everyone in the audience, again, if you haven't yet, please go to the website and spend half an hour, 1 hour, 4 hours, because there's material, there's a lot of things to love about this exhibition, the 6 chapters of it.
That's a really wonderful way, I think, to wrap things up. I wish we didn't have to wrap things up. This was a fascinating discussion, and I think we probably could go for another hour without any difficulty. There's enough content in the exhibit to really sustain that. But for now, I want to thank all of you for attending today's roundtable. Thanks to our moderators, Thomás and Nydia. Thanks to Sophie for proposing this exhibit in the first place. And thanks, probably above all, to the curatorial team. Alessia, Olivia, Wilmari, thank you for all the work that you put in, for all of the time you spent exploring our collections, and all of the effort that went into the final exhibit. It looks great, and I hope that everyone will take Thomás's recommendation to heart and go and visit our website to learn more about changing conceptions of the sun in the early modern period. And now you'll have a better sense, I hope, of the work that went into putting that all together. All of the time and energy that went into synthesizing these ideas. As a reminder, you can also, while you're on our website, read about our fellowship program, which supported several of the people on today's panel. And you can sign up for email updates about future Linda Hall Library events. And if you want to learn more about those, you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. I think I've covered all of our social media platforms. In any case, I hope that we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much again for joining us. And for now, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Maybe go out and enjoy the sun. Goodbye for now from Kansas City. Take care, everybody.